Welcome to the People in AI podcast by Runway AI. We're joined today by Alex Panait, Insurance Solutions and VP of Strategy at Lazarus AI, to discuss the transformative impact of AI in the insurance sector. We'll explore Alex's journey, the importance of explainable AI, and the future of AI-driven innovation in financial services. Alex has a pretty interesting, diverse, and deep expertise in AI, having been involved in several large companies, particularly in the insurance sector as well. So Alex, we'd love to learn about your journey and what brought you to Lazarus. I know you have a diverse set of experiences across consulting firms, strategy firms, insurance, and of course, underlying all of that is your experience with machine learning and AI over the last decade or so. So maybe in your own words, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
Hey, Carter. Awesome to be here, man. So the story is obviously unpredictable, if I go back, 15, 20 years ago. But it all goes back to my early days in, tinkering with computers and, getting my hands on one when I was in my fifth grade. So I grew up in Romania. And let's say, there was a little bit of a lag on how certain technologies and when they hit the market. But that was the moment when I realized this is for me. And so I really spent a lot of time getting into building computer systems, both kind of the hardware and software from that early age. And I was troubleshooting, my neighbors, systems, and then became kind of a mini ISP for my neighborhood, which were really, really fun days. But after spending about 4 years in getting my coding skills from let's say C-level to some level of decency. At the time, C++ was the cutting edge. I then took a big detour. So I spent a lot of time in finance, in consulting. I spent about 14 years at PwC across a couple of continents, and after really looking at it as almost like a school and learning about business, learning about finance, learning about accounting. There was still something, missing. That missing piece was, going back to technology and really applying some of the things that I've learned over, a decade or so of, let's say, primarily focused roles in technology, but rather more like consulting. I then decided I wanted to do something about it. So that was when I was part of a program with PwC and BCG, and we really got into bringing cutting edge technologies into the way we used to deliver services there, but also building products. And lo and behold, one of the biggest problems, which I'm sure it won't be at all strange to you or others, is dealing with unstructured data. And because, pretty much my entire career has been revolving around financial services, guess what? In a financial services org, if you really step back and you think of it as in very abstract ways, you really don't have any physical transformation of any materials happening in those organizations. What you truly have is data coming in one way, and there's many ways for data to make its way into an org, and there's a bunch of things happening in the middle, mostly aspects around reasoning and number crunching, and then on the other side, you truly don't have anything other than data. Perhaps one might think, okay, there's a policy in insurance or there's a contract in banking. But what you truly have is data on a different type of medium, PDF, printed, or handwritten, which hasn't happened much anymore. But, if we go back, this industry is old enough, you get things like microfilms that people hand you over. So that was kind of the catalyst for me, getting into AI was how do we deal with unstructured data, and how can we actually start to leverage data at scale. It was just very serendipitous when Lazarus reached out and basically simply said, hey, we're working on something that could solve this problem, and I've noticed you talked about it. Are you interested in learning more? What I saw was something that wasn't done before, which was just understanding documents without any training. So I said, if this claim is true, I'm very much interested. And, the rest is history after that. Happy to dive deeper into some of those junction points. But you kind of got a very, very high level flyby of how I got from there to here.
No, awesome. This is the thing, right? So we, having been in the industry for, a few years now, for all of us, some of us saw what it could be if we had a capability like the current capability of AI and machine learning has been around for a while. We've seen it evolve, but the generative AI movement has really brought things to life in a much more accelerated way than was possible before. Right, we were training custom models every single time, and now you have these general purpose, almost a general purpose technology, and we were waiting for that. Right, many of us were striving towards it. Certainly at Element, we were trying to do the same thing. Now, having said that, tell us a little bit about Lazarus itself. So, what are you guys building? What does Lazarus do? And how do your clients benefit from what you have built?
Absolutely. So let me give you a little bit of the early history, because there's some really the roots are coming from there. So Lazarus first started in the business of cancer research. So we were building an AI diagnostic tool that would help clinicians diagnose melanoma. We did that for a while. Things were going okay. Our product started to kind of take off, and we were getting towards product market fit, and the whole world got obviously by surprise with COVID. So that definitely created a ripple effect with our customers back then. But it was really towards the end of 2021, and I think it was the end of the summer, essentially, when this draft FDA regulation went out. And, it was draft, but it had something in there that basically stated that, any signal processing device that essentially will potentially take some changes or will suffer some changes, will have to go through, de novo approval. And guess what? Computers are signal processing devices, and machine learning models, they tend to change because that's what we want them to do. So every one of our customers essentially didn't want to get sued. And so while they liked our product, while they were using it, the fear of regulatory, action really gave them no option. And so it ended up giving us almost no option. So we were left with a dead product in about 3 months of Runway when we decided, hey, we have to pivot. And because we had to, label images on how, let's say the previous gen of models were designed to work, we did one thing just out of pure necessity, which was understanding physician handwriting, because the better labels we had, right, the better our prediction is going to be. And so understanding, doctor notes, understanding diagnosis, understanding various other artifacts that were mostly handwritten, could really make the difference. So having had built that type of OCR ourselves, because there wasn't anything physician handwriting grade out there, gave us the opportunity to pivot into what initially, we targeted was this aspect of understanding forms or understanding various types of documents that included handwriting, and that was essentially the lifeline we got, and turned into, for a while, what we jokingly talk about as a paper reading company. And that was all good, great. It was working. We managed to extend the runway, week by week, month by month, up to a point where one of the customers that we had basically became the catalyst of us committing to building a large language model. And the reason for that was they simply didn't want to send us training data because, it's work on their end. And so yet again, another kind of necessity-driven, innovation where we were looking at language models. We had this hypothesis that, document structure, if understood and reasoned through, might actually be enough to deal with, most of the variability that's out there. And so it was really at the beginning of 2022 when, after looking at a bunch of other large language models out there, trying different things that didn't work, we kind of decided to build our own. And that was really the moment when we put ourselves on the target of becoming, what we are today, which is basically a company that builds AI systems for the enterprise and for the government. But within those AI systems, the biggest focus are, the foundational models. So we don't necessarily call ourselves just a foundation model company, but rather a company that builds AI systems to help solve some of the hardest problems out there that involve unstructured data.
Interesting. So, you mentioned that, existing large language models did not work for you. So actually just two-part question. So one is they did not do what you wanted them to do. And what you're doing right now is, given any type of document with very little training, it is able to adapt, extract information, summarize them, regardless of context, right? If I get that correctly. So, but why did they not work? And what did you have to do to make them do what I just said?
Yeah. Well, so there's a few things at play, right? One of them, just to kind of continue on a little bit of the thought that I mentioned earlier, is document structure actually carries information, or a subtle piece of information that may not be intuitively obvious, but it is easy to get your mind around, which is position of the words on the page means something. So the best example is if you have, let's say, a phone number that you've OCR'd, not knowing where that phone number is on the page may not give you essentially the right perspective to then reason, around the context and in its entirety, based on simply the text itself. Because there will be situations where there's supposed to be a phone number somewhere on the page, but the one that was picked up was the one from the fine print in the footer. Well, unless you're really facing some really bad scenarios in some sort of litigation, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to what's in the fine print on a footnote. And so understanding that word is, the bottom, of the page, for example, matters if you're searching for a number that's, in a form that's supposed to, say, phone number and have an empty box next to it, right? Because what these models are really good at, they're good at predicting kind of the next word, right? And so, or the next token. And so in that scenario, if there's a phone number there, then it might just predict that one. But if there's a phone number in the footer and you know that it's there, it's probably not relevant. So that's maybe a simple example. But there's more to it, right? There's the read order of the text, right? You can have multi-columnar structure. You can have, or something as simple as a letter. You have the addressee, and if you just read left to right, you might just essentially end up commingling words, which then become really a big soup of words with not a lot of meaning. If you don't have that, what I like to call telemetry about them in place. So we had to solve that problem. The way we solved it was just building a new dimension into the language model. So now you don't just have the position of the word in the text or the position of the token, right, in the set of tokens, but we also have the positional embedding of the coordinates of the bounding boxes. And so best way I analogize this to folks is when you're asking a question of our model, the model essentially imagines where that answer fits on the page. Now, we don't expose the bounding box coordinates unless you need them, but they are being, essentially computed, quote unquote, by the model when it generates the answer. So that was one of the biggest things that we couldn't really find something that worked perfectly out there. The other big aspect was designing this to fit the enterprise needs. So we said, okay, what is it most important? Because there's trade-offs, right? You can optimize for various things, but what are enterprises valuing? Well, they value reliability, consistency, and probably would rather have a false negative bias than have to deal with, aspects of false positives. So we said, okay, how can we make that happen? Well, what if we have these models respond with information just from the document? Well, how can we do that? When now all of a sudden we've increased the number of tokens a document would use because you have all the coordinates that I just mentioned that are being tokenized essentially. And so what we did is we solved for the context window limitation. So our first gen had 1 billion tokens as context window. Now, it was not verbose, and it wouldn't really build a haiku of a medical record for you if you wanted to. But I've rarely seen that as a requirement from our customers. So those are a couple of things that I would point out. I mean, there's a bunch more around, the fine tuning, the RLHF, but it was really building something that has a different purpose and solving some of these quirks along the way.
Okay, so if I had to quickly summarize that, I think some of the key breakthroughs that you brought, adding an additional dimension to existing sort of the LLM architecture, right? To understand not just the words and their meaning, but their positional strength and context to the meaning. You've increased context window to be the entire document in its length. So sort of like, well, you don't need a RAG system anymore. Your system is the RAG because it has the full document. It's retrieving everything in context with the entirety of the document, which makes it far more, I would say, okay, I'm going to make a hypothesis here, but I would love your confirmation. I think this would make it more accurate and less hallucinogenic, if you will, than a RAG system. So am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You are right. I mean, we measure hallucination ratio, and we know we're under 1% hallucination ratio. And again, it's because our models are not designed to optimize for human engagement. They really decide to optimize for factual reasoning, if you will. And they're stubborn sometimes. They just simply would rather not respond than risk responding with the wrong information. So you might see sometimes something coming back to you, quote unquote, as not in context. Well, what that means is the answer doesn't seem to be in the context that was provided, aka the document. So we would rather have that than a made up social security number or a made up date or any other artifacts. That was really the objective, and the trade-offs, especially in the first gen, were the verbosity, like I said, was one trade-off, but these things have been worked out since. But the principles are the same.
Mm-hmm. Right. And another aspect, are your models far more lightweight than a full-on LLM, because you don't need the internet's knowledge or the entirety of it in order to respond to something from a document, particularly in the enterprise context?
Yeah, interesting. I would say yes and no. And the reason I say that is to be able to understand, the documents and the relationships and the semantics, you kind of have to have an in-depth understanding of the industry, right? So if we're talking insurance, there's common sense that everyone, I think, agrees to and can use. But there's also, industry-specific terminology. You have industry-specific interpretation of certain things. With our focus mostly being in the financial services space, there's a lot of nuance, right? So benefiting from the knowledge that is truly out there on the internet is helpful for dealing with these more nuanced aspects of understanding, the meaning behind certain acronyms or the meaning behind certain words, and being able to increase the quality of the reasoning, essentially. But it's also very true that we don't need to know, all the species of birds to know what a bird is like, right? That kind of analogy. We are we're continuously optimizing for having these models truly be responsible for reasoning or thinking patterns, and have less and less, storage of facts. Facts can be stored somewhere else, let's say, and we have something for that. But let the models just be focused on doing what they do best, which is this aspect of reasoning or comprehension, let's say.
So can you speak to some of the use cases where this could be applied? And part two of that question also, what industries are you in, right? And so use cases vary by industry. So general use cases and then by industry would be great to understand.
Yeah. So you have the way we think about this aspect is, and I'll use this analogy from manufacturing, which is vertically integrated supply chain companies showing that they can be the most innovative now and can move the fastest, right? And that stems in the fact that if you control the entire supply chain of your process, then you're able to make and effect changes much more quickly, and be able to have a high resolution feedback loop in terms of what are the components of that system that may need a different design or may need to be improved upon. So that is a bit of a primer as to the use cases that we serve are either as simple as just simply OCRing documents and extracting data, whether that is just simple key value pairs or simple classification of a document based on its content, and so these are what I would call table stakes. But there's still big problems for many customers, especially in the domain of where those documents have a lot of variability, and the old generation of AI tech wasn't really robust enough to deliver on the ROI that one needed. Right? There was folks were in this kind of purgatory of continuous training. So we solved that problem but those are the basic, things that one would start with. But then if you go back to, how I was thinking about, financial services, what if you need to reason through that information? This is where, having this capability starts to unlock new types of use cases. From things like summarizing long-form documents, and because of our legacy in healthcare, one of the first fine-tuned variants that we built of our base model was a medical records summarizer model. So we summarize medical records. We then moved into more generic summarization territory, where we can take any type of document, and with a very large context window, you can really take a 400-page bond offering and summarize that one. And those are pretty valuable, pretty cool. But where it gets really interesting, and these are the things that maybe excite me more than others, are what can you do if you can reason through this data? What are the things that actually you can accomplish? Well, you can then start to look at comparing contract clauses, right, based on the semantics and not necessarily based on the words themselves, right? And here, especially in financial services, you can have semantics be very fine, but it could lead to a completely different economic outcome. If those things are either similar, or when they're supposed to be similar and they're not, or vice versa, right? But more recently, what was almost like a bit of a pipe dream about a year ago, being able to deploy something like this at scale in a due diligence transaction, for example, can really add that what I would call net new value, as opposed to what I think intuitively everyone thinks about is cost reduction. But how about creating new value, right? So an aspect of creating new value is, if you have a deal that is time limited in terms of putting a bid on it, and you really only have 4, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, a couple of months, and you have to go through 10,000 contracts. How will you be able to do that? Even if money was no object, where will you find those experts? Will they be able to?
You mean aside from hiring a bunch of MBA interns and have them work through the night? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Open heart.
And say you can get over 10,000, but what do you do when you have 100,000 contracts in 3 weeks? Then it becomes right. So those are the areas that are very interesting, because we're getting closer to finally delivering on the promise of of the past maybe decade and a half since cloud migration has become a thing and everyone digitized their archives, and there's data lakes everywhere, right? There's the data ocean now, probably, and most of that data is accumulating dust, right, and cost. But now I think we're getting much closer to being able to get the value out of it, or at least some value, and the journey it's just at the beginning now. But contextualizing information from internal or external sources and performing multi-stage reasoning is kind of where the next big pockets of value seem to be.
Interesting.
And I'll respond to the. I want to kind of follow up with the industries and the use cases, but to be more specific. So for us, financial services, with insurance being kind of the largest vertical, and healthcare, legal, I would say secondarily, are where most of our focus lies right now, and it covers all major areas of the globe. So, from Japan to Australia to the U.S., Canada. Those are the couple verticals, if you will, that we're spending most time on. But also, in enabling kind of a spectrum of use cases that I mentioned across those, with multimodality now, being the next catalyst for, at least for the insurance industry, where we're really deploying some very interesting solutions around multimodal contextual understanding of information, and how that gets essentially interpreted and perhaps augmenting underwriting, or changing the way folks are looking at claims fraud use cases as kind of a couple ones that I would pick out.
Amazing. And I'm glad you went into the use case, right? Because now the insurance industry, highly regulated, right? So how do you think about Lazarus going in there, looking at private information, the data, the outcomes? Now, each one of the regulators across states, they're also coming out with AI-specific regulation as well, right? So how does that impact Lazarus? How do you think about, incorporating regulations in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's been top of mind, and maybe would probably go as far as to say is it's probably one of the things that the team expected of me to look into because of my legacy. But there were two choices we could have made, right? One is being reactive, or being proactive and really turning that into, let's just say, a truly a competitive advantage, but working in our favor, right? Meaning, what is it that will be reasonably valuable and necessary for both the actual private companies or public companies and the regulators to have in place to be able to sleep at night, right, and rely on this type of technology that promises a lot for all of us, and it starts from something quite simple, which is open up the black box, right? So just don't make it be too opaque, because I don't think any of us really want to just wonder as to whether or not the next time when we get a response it'll be accurate. But what are those things that we could make, available for folks to actually challenge, or maybe just simply aggregate, and whether the need will come one day, they will be able to produce those types of, perspectives that, regulators will want, or public markets will want. So a couple examples. Confidence scores, right, to answers. Confidence scores are important because if you have a confidence score, it doesn't have to be a scientific, precise, standalone perspective, but rather a relative metric is actually what we found to be, quite useful. And the opportunity to create a confidence score for us was a bit more obvious because we had this vertical integration with all the other things we're building. So if we're using our own OCR, then we know what the confidence was when, the model identified those, either the text itself or just, some of the name entity recognition, let's say, in the actual document. So that gets passed over to the large language model. The large language model then produces its own confidence score and kind of and blends all the other artifacts that are coming from the OCR or the layout comprehension model that's in charge of understanding document structure, like I mentioned earlier, and it produces this final metric that just by looking at it is not going to be all that insightful. But when you start to observe what is that confidence score across maybe 100 samples of my process, that actually converges with the accuracy that I'm looking to expect, right? So say, you have a messy document that has handwriting and it's poor resolution, a confidence score, something like 75, 80% could mean 100% accuracy or 95% accuracy, based on your facts and circumstances. Whereas a typed text PDF that's pristine, you probably want to accept something that's in the high 90s as a confidence score. But that allows folks to actually embed a human-in-the-loop process with a lot more precision and with a lot more control. And so that's component number one. Component number two is explainability, meaning, what is the reasoning behind, producing that answer, and what are the references and citations? And like you mentioned, we kind of do RAG, quote unquote RAG, right, on the entire document. So it's easy for us to provide those, grounding data points.
Exactly, right. I think two things that you mentioned, right? Accuracy, these numbers, these metrics that we look for in and of themselves are so context dependent, like the meaning of it, right? So 75% versus 95%, like both are acceptable depending on the context. And explainability is a hard one too, right? Like, you can explain something, but it has to be good enough for the user. So one enterprise may find a level of explainability acceptable versus another enterprise may not. So which brings me to a whole new segment of this conversation, which is enterprise adoption, right? And put this into context, right? Sequoia came out with a report last week, documenting about $600 million in funding that has gone into startups. Maybe it's even more than that, but definitely the cost of producing all this AI that we have in the world right now is at about $600 million. And they take OpenAI as an example, generating about 3.5 billion. So did I say 600 million? I meant 600 billion.
Yeah.
And then 3.5 billion. But let's take all the, including yourselves, like take all the revenue that's being generated by all the startups in AI right now, maybe 10 billion, right? 20 billion at the most. Definitely not equal to what's been put into these systems. For that to happen, enterprises need to adopt, because that's how these companies are going to generate revenue and match up to what's gone into creating them. If we don't, funding's going to dry up, which means we might face another AI winter, not because of the technology, but because adoption hasn't caught up and revenue hasn't caught up to the growth needs of these companies. So long-winded, but that's the setup, right? So enterprise adoption is critical to actually make this technology sustainable. Everyone sees the capability, but it's lagging. So with that as a premise, what are your thoughts on it in general? And then specifically, what's stopping enterprises from adopting?
Yeah, that is definitely a thing that I think a lot about, because I don't think it's going to be soon. It's going to be it's not going to be before long until we're going to have boards really demanding, explanations or the proof of the ROI, right, on the capital they committed to their own management team. And I'm talking about private, public companies in the industry, not necessarily AI companies, right? Because the level of capital that's been committed beyond just the investment that went into startups has been significant, and especially directed towards hardware, right? So there's a bit of a capex here that's been accumulating, and Big Sequoia is looking at the entire investment, including private companies, which is essentially creating this pressure to show the results, right? Otherwise, that capital could have been deployed somewhere else for a better ROI. So I've been worried about that, and I think there's a couple things at play. One is the expectation setup, which I think hasn't been doing all of us a favor, in the sense that it's just been it's really a bit overhyped in terms of the ability to truly disrupt and change things overnight. And what I tell the folks is that typically it's not a technology problem. Transformation takes way more than just having the technology working. It's really a people, truly a people problem. It's redesigning and sustaining change to instill a new behavior. It takes a while, and it takes consistent and relentless effort to redesign processes and have an organization essentially change the way it behaves to fully leverage the benefits of tech. And so there's that as a macro factor. And then if we think about, okay, what are practically the things that companies are worried about, in terms of increasing their adoption? Well, there's a few things. One is, this aspect around, hallucination still has folks, a little bit worried because it's not as much about the frequency, but it's the could factor. What if we do something that would, essentially either deny a payment that someone's entitled for, or sometimes, making the wrong decision in terms of, who should get that, or making some very lax decisions that may not have anything to back them up with, in terms of the why. And so, it's fine when you run a POC or a pilot, but if you aggregate a lot of this risk, then it could become systemic if you don't, design it and have the right checks and balances in place. And so companies have been gladly, getting into testing the technology and, looking at a bunch of use cases and exploring what they could do with it. But very few have decided to really put a significant, let's say, percentage of critical business processes on top of the tech. But we're here to say that you can, with some of these, things in place, such as, the ability to kind of see, behind the scenes and in terms of the why. So explaining things is helping them. And then making sure that they know that once they, give these processes the magic of the technology to have it operate behind the scenes, it's all going to be done much faster. It's all going to be done based on, either your policies or your documentation, and just level setting with them that, it's something that needs to be looked at as if you were handing it over to an employee, and level expectations where, you're not going to get 100%, but don't let get 80% or 90% get in the way of, 100% getting into the way of the 80 or 90%. Which sometimes is like a light bulb moment where folks realize that, hey, our processes as they are today, executed by people, are not 100% right either. And so coming at it with a lot more practicality and kind of, let's say, appreciating what is fantastic and fascinating and it works, and just not necessarily kind of avoiding or waiting until things are really ready or close to that 100% that ideally everyone wants. I think has been liberating for some customers, but the vast majority of the market, it's still trying to figure out how do we deploy this thing at scale.
Yeah, no, I think it's several issues that you've stacked one on top of each other, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I think first and foremost is the transformation aspect of it. I think we've been, even prior to general purpose AI appearing on the scene, there was a transformation that companies were going through anyways, right? Like as they were deploying data science and machine learning, that sort of got supercharged with GPTs coming into the picture. And even back then, the limiting factor was people, process technology, the standard stuff, right? Where processes need to change, how people, how employees or organizations adapt and change to that, and changing large organizations is very hard. There's lots of resistance. Honestly, like in some cases, I remember back, 6 years ago, there was one, someone in investment, it was an investment bank, and the analyst there was like, I am purposely not sharing what I know with the data science team because I think my job will go away. I mean, that hasn't gone away either, right? I think there's so people need to change, processes need to change. I think to your point, transformation, I just hope we get there quickly enough before, the calls come in for the ROI, right? Right away. And I think that's this dangerous balance. Hopefully, we'll see some of that getting unlocked.
I think it will. I think it will because, whether or not we're going to go through a little bit of a, let's say, reset of expectations, the value prop is clear. You can do certain things that you couldn't do before. And once, some of the folks realize that this could really be, the key to them, let's say, redealing the deck, right, and being able to kind of pick a better set of cards. I think it's just the nature of the free market that is going to essentially, help push this through. The speed at which that happens, I think, will be the key here, and whether or not, all companies will be able to see this whole journey through. Will definitely be challenging, a challenging, bumpy road ahead. But the value, I think, it's clear, and the cat is essentially out of the bag.
Yeah, or the genie is out of the lamp, or whatever, right? Like you can't put this back in. I think the ones who are going to, I think it's definitely there. I mean, the ones who are going to adopt quickly this technology will be the winners in this market for sure. Alex, I think we're almost at the end, but maybe a couple of questions. First one, advice to enterprises as they're adopting AI so that they can move faster. This is not a choice. This is happening, and the ones who don't adapt fast enough will be left behind. That is a certainty now. And so advice that you give to professionals within enterprises so they can make sure that their companies are competitive, number one. Number two, what new developments in AI are you excited about? And three, for those interested in learning more about Lazarus or connecting with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'll start with the first one, right? In order here, advice to enterprises. Well, I think first advice is get in the game, right? If you haven't already, if you are in the game, think about it this way. And I'm paraphrasing something I heard from one of our customers. If we're not doing this, they said, it's going to be done to us. And so there's still a choice to be made as to whether or not, one has and wants to take the opportunity to kind of control the narrative and their own destiny, or be more of a fast follower or a late bloomer. But the real way in which you can make rapid progress is to get your hands on the tech and experiment with it and try things by redesigning the old stuff, and try things that maybe give you an opportunity to set something net new, like a greenfield operation, right? Where you don't have the legacy of the past that you have to deal with. So those would be the thoughts I would have for folks. And, don't take no for an answer whether something is possible or not. Now, your second point, what am I excited about? There's a lot. So there's this aspect of solving the memory problem, which we're working on as well. And it ties into what I mentioned earlier, where you have the models do thinking essentially, and some other type of structure that acts as memory. That is fascinating because it's going to help us, plug and play, various components, modules, competencies, and connecting that with the aspect of using tools and perform planning type of work. We're getting very close to giving these models objectives on doing something and then letting them, take up, 6 hours and this much compute, and just coming back and taking a look at the work and seeing have we made any progress in researching this topic for this particular sets of facts and circumstances. Those are really, really cool, and they will continue to bring more of that net new value generation that I'm expecting to see. Because let's be honest, cost can only go down to zero. And they probably will never reach that because you're going to hit the diminishing returns, and electricity still has to be paid, right? So it's those aspects that will bring the next pockets of value from the tech, and I think adoption and seeing the reaction and kind of figuring out where that course adjustment needs to happen. I'm excited about that as well. So it's the technology and the use of it that I think will be very cool to witness. And then Lazarus, we'll have a new website soon. But until then, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to everyone on my team. Most folks are on LinkedIn these days, but there's a way to get in touch with us on Discord or on Twitter. But I would say LinkedIn is probably where most professionals are engaging with the content and the verticals that we operate. So happy to pick up on on a conversation there. And Karthik, if you have anyone wondering, you know where we are.
Alex, this was so good. I think I have way more questions. I think we can do 2 more episodes of the podcast with the amount we can keep talking about with your wealth of knowledge. But thank you so much for joining us today. And hey, listen, all the power to Lazarus, and I'm looking forward to seeing more deployments and taking over the insurance industry as you guys keep going.
Thank you, man. Me too.